If you come to a senior with one problem, you'll walk away with two other problems that should be solved first. And I don't think agents are super effective at getting to the bottom of what you really want. Even using reasoning, I don't think we're quite there.
Software's eating the world, but AI's eating that too. Ship, learn, fix, that's how we get AI right. Look at your fucking data, keep that quality tight. Out of the lab, into the field, time to deploy. Real world problems, real solutions, that's what we employ.
Welcome back to How AI is Built. This is Nikolai, and today I'm talking to Ben Holmes, a software engineer at Warp, where they are building the AI-first terminal. And in this episode, we will be touching on a bunch of different areas of AI-assisted coding. Like, for example, his assumption is that a lot of frameworks, like, for example, React Native, are dead, because AI easily translates between different coding languages. So you actually don't need a common denominator, but you actually can take the JavaScript and translate it into native code, into Swift. And at the same time, that different models or different tools are still suited for different workflows. And today it's still up to the developer to actually figure out when to use which. So for example, Gemini really beats Claude at debugging. And lastly, that, for example, manual context beats web search every time. So instead of giving your model an instruction to search the web, rather do it yourself, find the right page in the documentation, and feed it into the model. Let's do it. How did you get into engineering?
I got into it. All right, full life story. Let's go. I took a programming class back sophomore year of high school. That's really where I got excited by it. And this was using Java back in the day. And when you're learning your first programming language, you have no taste. So you just think, I can type in this box and a really, really cool thing appears. So I don't care if it's Java or whatever else. So I learned graphics programming. I realized I care a lot about design and front end a lot more than other aspects of tech. So building games, that got me excited by it in a way that other classes or online tutorials didn't. And slowly figure out how to make games. Like I made Galaga, made graphics with GIMP. And again, like when you have no context, everything's cool. So it was just this obsession to build these perfect replicas of stuff that exists in the world. And then it went into a web development internship in high school, which is a rare thing to have as a high schooler, but that got me into applying front end to JavaScript and web programming, and snowballed into taking CS in college, taking my first programming job, posting videos on Twitter about my process, which led me deeper into the web dev tooling space. So I've kind of refined my niche and like found my tribe through just being very public about what I'm doing and not stopping.
And what are you now doing at Warp? Because like Go and Rust is very similar, dissimilar in the end to like front end stack, besides probably the sync engine you have been building.
Yeah. I don't think we have a proper client-side sync layer in Warp, since most features are talking to LLMs with data streaming. So that's a bulk of it. And as you can imagine, Golang's a really good application for that. How am I liking it? I definitely enjoy learning Golang. I like the simplicity of it. For network programming, it's so nice to have a standard library that works for everything that you would expect. And I've been I've just been sharing on Twitter every little thing I learned. Like, oh, you can have a defer statement to remember cleanup code and put it right next to the code that opened the connection. That's cool. Now I won't forget to do that. And Go routines, far more useful than async await in JavaScript, because you can truly put it on a separate thread. You don't have to pollute an entire call stack with async await. It's a lot more convenient. So it just feels like a really well-built language. But I have scratched the surface of all the weirdness of Golang that I'm sure will be more and more annoying the more code I write. But for now, I'm in my honeymoon phase, and Golang's been a lot of fun to pick up. Rust, I like that the compiler will not let you run the program until it's right, because it usually means it works first try. We use it for graphics programming as well, and that's where it's tough because the compile time of Rust is a good 20, 30 seconds to see if you wrote your flexbox correctly. And that's rough. I'm so used to just add a Tailwind class, boom, that looks right, and then just move on. So I'm getting used to that part. It's the slower iteration loop that really bogs down Rust, not really the language. But if it was fast compile times, I would love using Rust as well for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, I'm torn on Rust. I love Go. I'm torn on Rust. I feel like Rust
me.
is being forced on me.
Who's forcing it on you?
The entire industry, because like most of like the entire data engineering decided, hey, we're gonna go with Rust. Most of AI stuff, like the new age things, are also being developed in Rust.
Really?
And yeah.
Okay. Like low level training models, or do you mean high level interacting with OpenAI and building servers?
Rather low level. So like for example, outlines, but also the transformer library. By Hugging Face, tick token by Hugging Face as well, like the tokenization library. So there's like a lot more push happening into Rust. Also embedded programming is really picking up, and it isn't my favorite because I hate like this like slow drag when I'm sitting down and having to wait for it to compile. That's why I love Go, because it's so fast. Like the feedback cycles you can take are really the thing that I think makes the programming cycles so good.
Yeah. And Golang can work on embedded systems. The TypeScript team chose Golang instead of Rust to build an entire compiler. People can do this. It just seems like Go really found its niche in network programming, since that's where it was really built for. And Rust has just taken over low-level programming. I may have tried it at the wrong time as well. I remember trying to build a vector database with embeddings using Rust. And there were very, very few resources available on how to do that. I got it working and it was very fast, but yeah, it was rough. It was mostly just community libraries. One guy pushes, one commit 6 months ago, a bunch of open issues, no way to get in contact. Like it either works or it doesn't and you move on to a different language. So I'm glad that's changing. It sounds like it is.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast today by the founder of UV, so the Python tooling company, and he mentioned that even async is now like getting bearable, I would say, in Rust, which I have to try out now because I found it so bad that I just stuck to mostly like single-threaded sync stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. In Warp internally, we use an event-driven system. So there's a lot of, well, it's divided into model, view, and controller. And you can subscribe to events like an AI model sent down a new stream that you need to render to the terminal as text. And that would emit an event from like some singleton that's listening to all that data. And there's some view that picks up that event. And I mean, it's tough to wrestle the borrow checker when you're working with nested closures and stuff like that. It's something that I feel like async programming could do. But I think Warp started, 2021? So that wasn't really a thing. You couldn't really do that.
Do you have any, like, a technical hill you would die on, like a really strong opinion that only few people agree with?
I put out one recently, and I'm not even sure if I agree with it fully. But I think I said there's a word, I don't think, this is for the mobile app development crowd, which I'm somewhat familiar with, coming out of web dev. And I said, there's a world where React Native is just completely irrelevant because you can write apps in their native language and use AIs to ship features and translate between the two languages. So why would you ever use lowest common denominator stuff like JavaScript when you could just write pure native code and then have an AI translate to every platform? I don't know if that'll play out, but learning Swift recently and learning Kotlin, I feel like these are both better languages than JavaScript on a lot of fronts, and I've enjoyed using them. And I also feel like you get a huge speed boost by just using native libraries built by the companies that maintain the operating systems. So I dream of a world where you're writing the right language for the job and just using software to translate between the layers. Don't know if it's possible today, but I want it to be.
I'm not sure whether that's like a strong opinion, but because I think Swift.
There are a lot
the
of
only
caveats
thing,
in there.
Yeah, I think what's holding back Swift is rather its documentation because it's
You're
so
right.
bad and outdated.
Oh, yeah.
And LLMs, like when they are trained on that stuff, I think they would be better if they wouldn't be trained on documentation.
Yes, for sure. I think the number one pushback is there's not enough training data on like Jetpack Compose, which is a new way to build Android apps. It's new, it's super well designed, but you only have documentation examples and nothing in the wild. And not a lot of people open source their mobile apps,
Yeah,
same way you would a web app.
yeah. I think this is a good through
Talk
line
myself
to go.
out of it, but it's gotta change.
I think that's a good like line to our like main topic. I would love to hear like what are at the moment like a few tools or practices in your coding workflow that give you disproportionate results in comparison to other developers.
Oh, man. Well, I've had to pick up two languages I've never used before for my new role. Coming to Warp, I did not know Rust and I did not know Golang. And I'm not the first employee to be in that bucket. Warp is very open to new grads and others. We're hiring, by the way. So don't be afraid of Rust is kind of the takeaway there. But coming in a new tech stack, I don't know the language. I don't know how to navigate the land. How do you pick up skills quickly and be effective without nagging the smartest person on Slack whenever you need help is kind of it. So there's two sides of the coin. One of them is the ability to turn all the tools off and just push through. This is more of a soft skill. But the first week on the job, there was, what was it? We wanted to show a banner if you didn't have desktop notifications enabled, and I just needed to show it in the right place in the UI, not really knowing anything about the code. So I was getting on a flight back from my onboarding in San Francisco, and I decided not to buy in-flight Wi-Fi and just sit down for the 5 hours with no internet and get this task done. That was the only thing that I could do on that flight. I had to raw dog some code. And I don't know what I looked like to the people next to me because I was cursing out my computer like hour 3, but just forcing yourself to use go to definition, flip around your editor really effectively. This is the Primevision method. Learn Vim motions, be able to navigate your tools. I was able to get it done. And I learned a lot about the code base in the process, just having a little Apple Notes message pulled up next to me of anything that I found, any aspect of the code base that seemed useful for later, just copy paste it, put it in a notepad, and just go from there. Take a really long engineering log and go deep on tasks without asking questions. I feel like that's going to be something engineers struggle with a year from now when we're so far removed from writing the code that we don't even know what that means. That's almost like navigating without Google Maps. So that's one thing that I don't think engineers really do, and I found really effective. The other would be the other side. How do you use AIs effectively to get things done? I feel like that's what more people are interested in. And I've used a huge mix of tools to be effective right now. The OpenAI desktop app is kind of an unsung hero because you can use it with any environment. Like if you have Xcode open, it can read your Xcode window. If you have cursor open, it can read your cursor window. It's only scoped to a file or a couple of files you have open, so it's good for in-the-moment questions. But I found trying to use like cursors inline suggestions versus OpenAI desktop, OpenAI was right more of the time. It seemed to do a better job of reading a file, no matter how long it is. Even if the file is 10,000 lines, it does a good job of snapshotting the whole thing and figuring stuff out. So I asked it basic questions like, I have this terminal view, which is like a huge monolithic model in the Warp code base. And I just wanted to ask it, can I access this piece of data if I have one of these? It's 10,000 lines. I don't know what function I would call to access this thing. So I just throw it in OpenAI desktop, and 2 seconds later, it can tell me, yeah, if you call this method in this way with a code snippet, you can access that data. It's like, that's super useful. Cursor weirdly doesn't help you with that. It's good at like really spray and pray, one shot, get some code in there, but it's not good at reading a file and giving you a proper answer. So OpenAI Desktop is like surprisingly good at that. And for more involved tasks, I would reach for Warp and use agent mode, which is something that we can go into more deeply. I think that's going to be a tool that not a lot of engineers are using.
I think if I would phrase it back a little bit, the first one reminds me really, sometimes going fast isn't the highest velocity you can take on a longer time horizon. Because skill acquisition still will be important, because there will always be areas where AI can't help you, or where the context construction for AI would be too damn difficult, so you have to do the work because it's coming from way too many sources and there is so much knowledge behind it that you can't just ask an LLM. And I'm actually afraid that down the road, like, either we won't have so many really good engineers anymore because we over rely on LLMs, or we just don't have the craft as much anymore because the LLMs or the agents can solve so damn much. Yeah. And I think like engineers, like the fundamental job is problem solving, not writing code. And I think like it's a fucking awesome job. It's just really fun. And I'm not sure whether I want to have it like fully automated.
Yeah. I think my sentiment is, because some comparisons are people who love driving like manual transmission sports cars. Like that's always going to be a thing. There was a time where knowing manual transmission made you a better like driver or better like chauffeur if you could shift super smoothly. But now it's just become kind of an indulgence. And I think at some point, just writing the code without assistance is going to be an indulgence more than something you get employed 6-figure salaries to do.
Yeah. I also say I prefer cars with manuals still.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I'm not a car guy, but I learned that way. So I just prefer it. And I think like most of it is my aversion to like Teslas and these like screen culture of cars. Like, and also Audi and BMW also have it. It's like massive screens, and for me, I get distracted easily. And I really hate the Tesla where there's always some shit popping up when I want to focus on the road and my driving. And I think like this is also partly my aversion to like automatic cars.
Yeah, I feel that way about car design. I don't own a car, but I am just interested by like all the automakers and how they're going to differentiate going forward. Because now everything just has big tablet screens and CarPlay. That's kind of it. And the only way that they can be different is just more pop-ups, more features you didn't ask for. And it's become a problem for sure. Yeah. I just want like knobs for AC, you know, that's all I want.
Like analog stuff. Give me knobs, give me levers. It's just so much smoother.
They're going to realize that's what people want. Whoever gets that first. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think? Because the entire space is about like putting AI into the IDE. Why do you think putting AI into a terminal is a great idea?
Yeah. It's an interesting take because some people see the terminal as kind of a sidecar to their development flow and the IDE is the main event. But that's mostly because we're code first and assistance second for a lot of tasks that we do. There are agents that you can pull up in a side panel, but you're still using cursor to tab complete and write the code yourself. But if you skate to where the puck is going, more of the thinking is around, can you describe the system architecture in a really tight diagram? Not necessarily what language is it implemented in, how is it going to be deployed, what are the lines of the Docker file? Just can you describe your system in a perfect explanation, like just an Excalibur, really? And if you can do that, it should be possible to, with a combination of explaining your requirements and showing useful references of what you want done, an agent should be able to take that and scaffold out whatever systems or code that you need and handle the rest of the details. especially if you have an existing system with best practices in the code that you can tell the LLM about. It can become an IC for all of the stuff that you're doing. And you focus more on being the staff engineer that can explain in design thinking terms what's going on. So knowing that, Warp has tried to sort of position itself as a development environment inside of your terminal. That's where it's heading. So right now, you can flip between writing terminal commands, and it works like any other terminal with a lot of extra niceties, like nice shell and autocompletions built in. So you don't even have to know what Z shell is. It's just good out of the box. You don't have to like go read a Medium article on how to rice your terminal. It's just good, which is nice. That was the original like appeal of Warp. But now there's a switch to just flip that input box from you can type a command to you can ask your computer to do something for you. You can ask it to do simple things like undo my last commit, and it'll figure out all the Git commands to run to do that. And it'll run commands on your behalf if it finds it necessary. But now we're trying to expand that to go deeper and deeper into, can I ask it to add this endpoint? Can I ask it to stand up an entirely new server? And we offer tools that go from running CLI commands to writing code diffs and showing you the output to even helping you write a plan of what you want to do with reasoning models like O1 so that you can use the right tools to figure out what you're going to do and then execute with a coding model like Claude or Gemini Pro. So it scales up. It's like a ratchet that goes from the bare bones, I want help with my Git commands, to the other end of the spectrum, just build a server for me. Here's a directory. Because a terminal, that's where the computer started. So of course, that's the starting point for an agent to actually get stuff done.
What allows, or what can Warp do by being a terminal that a regular IDE couldn't?
Yeah. Well, if you've tried tools like Klein, that's one of my favorite examples. I don't know if you've tried Klein before.
I think I've gone through like nearly every coding assistant on the market.
Okay.
Klein, everything.
Everything. Yeah, that's what I was using before joining Warp. And it was a source of inspiration since they have a plan and an act switch, which is really helpful. We have a similar flow, but it's a bit smarter. Depending on how involved your question is, we'll suggest writing a plan beforehand. Otherwise, we'll just go straight to act. That's nice because Klein, I always forget if I have the switch toggled the wrong way, and then I have to change it. So we're a little smarter than that. But something it can do is access your terminal and run basic commands on your behalf. And that is useful, but it can't easily, like, if you tried to run the server and it hit an error and you control C, it's not going to know that unless you type in the prompt box, the computer just failed, look at my terminal, try to read the lines and figure it out. In Warp, if you control C and there was an error exit code, it'll immediately know that in context. So if you ask a question, it sees the error already, no questions asked. And it'll even suggest changes that you can make to the code to fix that error. So it's aware of stuff that's running on your machine, and it's able to course correct by looking at your terminal output, which is something your IDE can't do as easily right now. Not to say it couldn't, since VS Code has a terminal, but Warp has just been sprinting in that direction, building the best terminal, which I think is a really nice way to go.
I haven't tried Warp in front-end projects yet. Does Warp recognize that Vitest just keeps running? Because that's my biggest pet peeve in Cursor. It throws up a Vitest command and then it just stalls.
And then it stalls. Yeah, I mean, you can control C and it'll go right back to the conversation and look at the test output. So you don't have to tell it to do that. But you do manually like kill the watch server so that it can see whether the test passed or failed. Otherwise, you run it in a separate terminal tab, whatever you want to do. It's not so stupid that if you hit Control C, the whole conversation is gone and you have to start over. It'll just go right back to responding and looking at whatever output was there.
Yeah, I think I listened to an episode with Jeremy Howard yesterday or today on Mad, and he mentioned their vision is humans and AI working in the same environment together, as opposed to something like Devon which just basically takes it, automates it, and does a pull request. And then you
Right.
have like your ugly code review in GitHub, which every
rough.
developer loves.
Yep.
And
Yep.
like besides even like that, the success rate of Devon is very low at the moment. But even it's like not truly collaborative, and they're
Yep.
like humans and AI are not working together. How do you imagine like the future looking like, and how Warp will move to actually make this collaboration more seamless?
Yeah, it's already doing that since it is conversational. It's not going to run in a separate cron job, however Devin schedules jobs. I have been trying out the model switcher to see how it can work. Because one nice thing about Warp is we've decoupled all the aspects of the coding agent. So you can choose whatever model you want for the general purpose agent. The planning agent, which is where you actually work on a plan together, you can change that between O1, O3, or whatever you want. And also the coding model. So when it actually goes and executes on a plan to write code, you can switch which model it uses for that purpose. And recently I switched over to Gemini 2.5 Pro just to see what it would be like instead of Claude. And something I noticed it does really well is if I run a command and it gets an error, and I just use Warp's shortcut to say fix this error because it sees one, Gemini can look at it, and instead of trying to write code to fix it, it'll say, I put debug logs here, here, and here. Go to your browser console, tell me what the output is, and then we'll work on it together. That's much better for actually figuring out what went wrong. Because something I've noticed Claude loves to do is get creative and write code. But Gemini seems to have debugging in mind a lot more. So you can report back to it with all of the print lines, and it'll say, oh, okay, that output didn't fire inside of your WebSocket or whatever you're trying to fix. That means the problem is here. So let's go ahead and write a small incremental improvement and see if that fixes it. And then it runs the server for you again, because Warp can run commands for you. You can see the output, you can report back until it's fixed. And that feels a lot more like I'm on a pair programming call with someone to figure out what went wrong, instead of trusting some junior to go off and try to fix the problem and then report back to me once it's fixed. Because usually that's not what you want to do. Gemini isn't the default right now, but I've been bullish on it internally. We're working on an eval system to actually put models head to head to see what is going to be most effective for debugging. But that was just a really nice experience where I felt like I was talking to another person on a call and working through the problem together instead of handing off and trusting a tool to do it for me.
I have to play with Gemini more. I haven't used it as
Yeah.
much. I'm still mostly like Claude 3.7 or 3.5.
And I think it's because most tools don't perform well with Gemini. Like Cursor, it just falls over. Doesn't work at all. From my experience, maybe it's changed in the recent weeks. I also tried using the Copilot desktop app, got an XML error the second I tried to use it. And with Warp, it works fine. We had some errors too, but we resolved those. So if you switch the toggle on, I think Warp is one of the best ways to use Gemini right now. So
Yeah. I
it's a
still
reason to
think
try it.
Anthropic, if they take anything from this episode, they should share their post-training recipe for function calling. This is the only thing I want to see in the open source, because how Claude can handle that stuff is like way beyond all of the other models.
Say more about that. Do you mean like when using Claude Code or something?
Yeah, in Claude Code, but also in Cursor. For me, Claude has the highest accuracy of actually getting function calls right, and also chaining function calls in sequence correctly. Because I think like OpenAI often, like especially the smaller model, if you're not using O3 or O1 Pro, they're just like they're doing one function call and then they're implementing something, and then that's basically it. So like chaining multiple function calls and actually picking the right tools, like that's something I haven't seen from the other providers yet. And especially also like the Gemini models are really bad at that. And I'm not sure whether something like the XML they have went with from the beginning which now is basically in every like coding assistant tool because cursor structuring with XML. Whether that's the thing that's actually throwing off the other models because they didn't go with XML from the start.
Maybe. I really don't know. This is only tangentially related, but we are moving away from XML streams that the client has to figure out to just a network of tool calls to hand things off appropriately. And we have been using Claude as the hive mind that takes the user's request and figures out, for this part of the task, I'm going to hand off to a coding agent. And to do the handoff, I'm going to do a function call that treats the other agent as a tool. And then once it reports back that the code was written, we kind of pop back up the stack and talk to the user. And yeah, Claude's been really good at that. We haven't really tested anything else for the top function calling part of everything. But is that kind of what you're talking about? Is like, yeah.
How do you think, like, what are the right tasks for the different models? Because in Warp, you're already using, I think, like, it's O1 for coming up with a plan. I would love to know, like, why did you make the choice to go with O1 instead of, like, any of the other models?
This idea was designed when O1 launched. So it was the first true beefed up reasoning model. I think O3 is our new default. But yeah, now that Claude can ratchet up more and more reasoning without being a separate model, that's something interesting to try. I've also tried just asking Gemini to be the plan writer, and that tends to work too. So it's really just feeling out what's best. We chose O1 and now O3 because it performed well and continues to perform well at understanding a user ask and then handing it off. I could actually sort of whiteboard out our stack if that's useful to anyone. I don't know if you usually talk about architecture on this show.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's a reason this is here. I just thought it would be more interesting than an Excalibur. But the way Warp is working right now for more intense user asks is when you ask it to perform something complex, like stand up, well, maybe authentication middleware isn't super intensive, but in JavaScript it is because no one knows how to do auth in JavaScript. So say you asked for that and you wanted it to figure out the plan of execution. So when you send a request to Warp, it comes through, and let me see where the border is on what you can actually see on screen. There we go. If you send a request to Warp, like stand up auth, let me make sure that's in frame. Yeah. So if you send this to Warp right now, this will go to a general agent. And by default, this is probably going to be Claude. So this receives a request, and all of this happens over a stream using Golang, so it's very fast and efficient. And it'll stream a response back to you, and that can contain text. That can contain CLI calls, which are also miniature tool calls. So it would send back a text response. It would send back a tool call payload saying, run this command, and then the client reports back the result of that command. So we would run something like ls, very basic example, like just to get a lay of the land inside of app/star, perhaps, if it knew what was going on. So it sends down a tool call result, and then the client can send that result back. And then once it gathers enough context to figure out what to do, I just realized if this is a complex task, we would be calling a reasoning model here. So O1 would be doing all of this legwork, or O3, right? Whatever you select, this is like the default. But a reasoning model would say, all right, that's the task. Let me understand the context of your code base. And then once it's done enough context gathering, it would say, now I have enough info. And then it would try to write out a plan of some kind. And in Warp, this pops up as a markdown file, just very basic, a list of step-by-step, here's what we need to do. And it would probably be something like install deps, and then that may have a number of subtasks. So Warp has a notion of tasks and subtasks that get performed, infinitely nested. So you can install deps, maybe an Express middleware package if you're using JavaScript and Express. And you don't have to tell it anything about your stack because it will do the context gathering for you. And then maybe it has another step to wire up the middleware or add middleware, and then so on and so forth. So this is something the user can review and edit. So it's helping you through the process of writing up a plan of how to do something. And once you feel good about the plan, you can manually edit it, or you can call refine to have the AI edit it for you. Once you accept it, this is kind of like a handoff phase where it goes from talking to O3 to talking to a coding agent. And the coding agent doesn't see any of this. It's just handed the plan on what to go ahead and do. And that acts as the start of the coding agent conversation to have a very focused summary of what needs to be accomplished. And I can explain like the rest of it, but it's pretty much the same process: context gathering, write code, do tool calls with whatever model is best for the task.
How do you guys think about validation of the different pieces of code I'm writing? Because usually you have multiple steps. They're implementing like multiple different functions, modules, classes, whatever.
Yes.
And often it's like the first one is incorrect and it's not even tested, and everything downstream also is incorrect. So it has like this whole dependency because it fucked up in the beginning. So I'm thinking what I'm often missing is like some validations which are run automatically, just that the code is valid, and also a semantic validation, like did we do the correct thing, which is in line with the user's intention.
Yeah. I think it's something Warp is improving on, but could do a lot more. Because I agree with you. You want to catch any step that has messed up. So one enforcement we added was that at the end of the plan, there must be a description of a test that's added if it makes sense, so that it can run the test and validate the approach. And it also enforces some documentation, whether it's inline code or a change to your README. So those are included in the steps, but those run at the end, obviously. You're talking about what if at step one we want to validate something. Excuse me. And we have a few tools for this that I think could be a lot more approachable. One of them is rules. This is something you can configure in your Warp settings. And rules describe something specific to your coding flow that you want the agent to know about. And this can be very general instructions of anytime you introduce a code change to an Express server, run ESLint period or something like that. Or run whatever is inside the README for that project if you want to make it more general. And then the agent should see that rule and know to respect it at each step. But of course, that's pretty manual. I do think we're working more on anytime it makes a code diff, maybe there's some like pre-commit things you want to run. Like if it ever modifies JavaScript code, run ESLint and validate before moving on. That's something that has definitely come up in the community that I think could be added.
I feel like what you said like 10 minutes ago with the like adding debugging lines.
Yeah.
Because I think like generating codes, generating tests, most people say like LLMs are really great at it. I say they're bullshit. Like they're so bad at generating tests.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to more complex cases. Like thinking through edge cases and happy paths and stuff like that. I don't think LLMs are good at that. And I would say like generating tests and defining like what, generating debug lines and defining what the string output of this debug lines should be an easier task for an LLM as opposed to generating a test suite.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think there was one build of Warp that was unintentional, but I actually kind of liked it. I switched on Gemini as the coding executor. And instead of finishing all the steps and reporting back to me, it stopped after every step and said, do you want me to run the server to see if this works? It's like, oh, that's not what Claude does. But you know what, Gemini? That's a good idea. Yeah, now that you did step one, let's go ahead and run the server and see if this thing works. Obviously, you want debug statements and other pieces to make sure of more than just, Hail Mary, does the dev server start? But it was an interesting flow. Should we stop the input and report back to the user after each step instead of after the whole job? And would that help you communicate better to make sure everything's working? I could see a case for that. It just depends on the workflow you expect.
Yeah, it's also it's so dependent, I think, in programming,
Yeah.
because it's really hard to decide, like, is this now worth running my entire test suite?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what is the type of change? Is it just like a swap in one line? I'm renaming
Yep.
variables. Usually I don't have to run an entire test suite. I'm adding like documentation. I'm changing doc strings. So there's like so much task dependency. Like, what am I doing? How complex is it? How invasive is it into the code base? That determines like, okay, how many checks should I run and when should I run them probably as well. I would love to go into a demo. I would love to see Warp in action by an expert.
Yeah, I would love that too. Let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, okay. So let's see what we can do. And this is a live demo, so if things go wrong, that's a feature, and we can report back to the team. I'm on a preview build of Warp right now. You can download the Warp preview on the website or the stable version, whichever you prefer. But this is Warp right here. It's very simple. It's just a terminal. You can CD into directories. You get some nice autocomplete that's both based on your last command and also based on what you intend to do. It's pretty smart like that. And you can also type things out that you want to do. So you can already see in this placeholder text, you can code, plan, build, or run commands. So I have this Go server pulled up, and I'm going to see if I can add some features to it and just see how that works. So if I wanted to do that, you can just type words, and Warp is smart enough to detect if you're typing words versus a command and flips you to the right mode. And you can also talk to it if you want to do that. So I'll go ahead and talk to it here. I want to render the index HTML on the base root of my Go server. Pretty specific ask there. I just know that I want to do that. And we're also using a nice model to format this and understand code. Like index.html actually reads index.html. Kind of nice. So whenever you put in a task like this, it'll think. If it doesn't need to write up a plan, it'll go straight to execution. So it starts with context gathering and looks around the server to see what's going on. And you never know what you're going to get.
How does the model decide whether like thinking or planning is necessary?
How do we decide something like that? Yeah, I don't know the source code for it, but I know the heuristic is if it's a complex enough ask, probably if it requires multiple sentences to explain your requirements, or if you attach a screenshot, we'll give you a prompt for that. Let me just try to do something that'll actually prompt us to get a plan. Let me think. What's something more complicated than this? I tried to do this earlier, and it was a total mess because OpenAI's documentation was incorrect. So it didn't work. Not by its own fault. But let me try to do this. I'm going to go to the main line. And I'm going to try to... Well, let me just ask it. Undo my last commit. Because I can never remember the thing. Let's do that. I'm going to roll one commit back here. So we're doing pager status. Yep. Cool. Thank you. Back to your regularly scheduled programming. And it's very short to make sure of things. Lovely. Okay. And I wrote down the OpenAI reference as a file so that it would actually work. Because the docs didn't explain this to me, but this is what I eventually found. So the feature that I wanted to add to this Go server was I wanted to set this thing up to add tool calls. This is a basic example using the OpenAI Realtime API. And one thing I couldn't figure out was actually adding tool calls in the middle. So if I asked it to do something like that, I could attach a photo, for example. You may need to blur this section. You don't. Okay, nothing sensitive on the screen. So you can attach useful information like diagrams, and to show you what that is, I just wrote an Excalibur explaining the way the server works now and the way I want it to work. So I want to add this get weather tool call that does something like this. I don't know what the code will look like, but I know generally if OpenAI wants to get weather, I want to talk to my Go server, get some stuff back, and then tell OpenAI about it. So let's see if we can do something like that. I want to add tool calls to my client-side connection using OpenAI Realtime. I attached a diagram of how I want the server to work. The changes are marked in red. And I'll see if it's just able to figure out what's going on there. And I also want to tell it about the documentation that I want it to reference. So I use this right here. I'll grab the relative path to it. Reference these docs to use OpenAI correctly. Okay. And you can see because it had multiple steps, this was a pretty easy ask. You can opt out. It's not going to just force you into a planning phase, but it will tell you we're going to create a plan with O3 and also a way to manage your plan suggestion settings if that annoys you for some reason. So now it's going to go ahead and actually search around and figure things out. And if you have any questions as we're going here, feel free to ask.
I think I really love that. I hate, like, in Cursor, I hate, like, model toggles. And in Klein, I also hate this, like, plan toggle because I always forget to switch.
Yeah,
also in Cursor,
exactly.
in the beginning, it always threw me off, like, the agent mode and chat mode. I always forgot to switch, and I wanted to ask something, then it did some changes, and I had to, like, revert all of them. So I think, like, the model should be smart enough to figure out what I want. Like, intent recognition will be something that I expect more of in, like, most code editors than what is done currently.
I'm with you on that. And I've also noticed that I can't trust the rollback features that are built into these IDEs. I need to use Git to be certain of a change. Because I've had that happen where I hit the undo button in Cursor and it fails. And I think, well, shoot, I actually can't do anything. And if I use undo in my editor, it doesn't undo what I expect. But Warp has access to your terminal, so it can Git commit stuff. That's our rollback feature. We just use what you have. That's kind of it. So yeah, this is a plan, by the way. I can full screen to show you what's going on here, but very bare bones. This is something you might write yourself and then hand off to an LLM if you wanted things done. This kind of just turned my diagram into words. The first thing that it suggested, I may not want to do right now. So this is actually doing a new branch. I'm going to remove that, but it's nice that it suggested one. Dedicated data channel tool. Dun, dun, dun. Client-side changes, data channel. Open subscribe to tool channel on message listener that routes messages to handle tool message. I think that's right. On request tool, get weather. Okay. Yeah, this seems correct, but I can see a lot of ways that this could go wrong if the objects are the wrong shape, but it does a decent job of pasting JSON in here so we don't mess up.
How do you recognize the failure modes? Because you already said, like, there are a lot of ways this could go wrong.
What do you mean by failure modes?
So you just said, like, there are a lot of ways this can go wrong. Like, how do you recognize this?
Having worked with OpenAI's library, I know that structuring the JSON in the right way is really the tricky part. It's not so much implementing the features front end and back end, it's getting the API contract right. And the one thing Warp doesn't have right now is web search. But I've found that even if it did, OpenAI's docs are incorrect. So that's a fun thing. I don't really know if any tool has cracked that. But yeah, my issue is usually I'm working with external partners like OpenAI's Realtime API, and I don't know if we're going to be talking the right language. But if we run into that, we should see console errors that we can paste in here and debug. I'm going to execute. I'm going to see what happens. And just to show you my config, this is my Warp settings. In here, there's a selector for the models that you want to use. And you can see there's a base model, which is what you interact with day to day. I have that set to auto, and that'll usually use Claude. Well, always use Claude. The coding model is specifically for writing diffs and executing on a plan. I have that manually overridden to Gemini just for my own testing, but we'll use Claude as well. Then the planning model. Light is something I have access to if you ever run out of tokens. This is using, I think, Gemini Flash to write up a plan. It's all right. It's certainly cheaper, and it does do the job. But if you're able to, you can access some reasoning models like these that are listed here. We do have DeepSeek available, but I would recommend using either O3 or O4 Mini. Okay, so what happened? Yeah, so we checked on the tool weather endpoint. Okay, the server endpoint looks good. Oh, shoot. Did I already have one? Did we actually roll back? That's probably a good question. So if I go ahead and look at this, we have handle function session. Let me see. Tool. Get weather handler. That looks right. I can't remember if this was already in my commit or if this was written, but this is something that's able to check on. Well, it was able to verify that everything is present. I may need to roll back the commit to see it live code. Is that something you'd like to see? I know we're running up on time a little bit.
No, I think that's good. I think it's really
it
interesting.
unstaged the commits without actually deleting them. That is what I asked for it to do earlier when I said to undo my git commit.
I think what's really interesting, what a lot of people aren't really doing is like you actually reviewed the plan. Because most people are just like, giving the plan, okay, that's good, and just fire it off. And I think the second thing is like, the more you work with it, treat it as a skill, and actually you will recognize what are common failure modes.
Yeah.
So you actually interject in a plan and actually can give it more context, give it the documentation you inserted within the markdown file to actually help it achieve the task so it can do better work. So in the end, like, you are constructing context. I think like context engineering is something I would love to see like more research on, and I would love people to share more best practices, like how to best and efficiently do it. Because I think like also web search is really bad for that. Like, because I can't really control like what it is looking at.
Yeah, and it can be really tough finding the right balance between using context on your machine versus reaching out for context on the web, and which one should you trust when you've gone off and gathered everything.
Yeah.
It is something we're exploring, but it came up internally. Like, we demoed, here's how web search might work. Then we thought, well, shoot, should it do a web search first? Or should it try to gather context for as long as possible and then do a web search for some sort of like OpenAI documentation link? What should it do? And the answer really is, if you can go off and do as much research as you can and then pass it as manual context, you will get the best results. Like, if I relied on web search, I had to go back and forth with OpenAI and Google for an hour to actually figure out the signatures for all these functions, which is crazy. People should have better docs, but they usually don't. So assuming that an AI is going to be this brilliant web researcher that gets it right the first try, not necessarily. I think the people who are most effective with these tools are really good at providing context through basic things like this, and then telling Warp to go read the file, making diagrams and pasting them as screenshots for Warp to review and understand what you really want accomplished. And if you use a good coding model like Gemini that's great at debugging, then I think it'll work really well for you.
Yeah. How do you think about reviewing the code? You're now basically in the Git view. But I think like I haven't seen a good code review integrated into any of the coding assistants yet. Like, that makes it really easy to get a quick view over the changes and assess whether it's right or not in a quick sense.
Yeah, totally. I can at least show what Warp's code diff looks like. Just go into a random project in here. I think I have a few.
By the way, Go by Example is such a good resource.
It's a great resource. Yeah, I just used that as a sandbox to learn the basics, and it was great. But yeah, I'm just looking for something that I could do a really basic edit. Like, I think in this one, what do we have? We have a README. Let me look at that. Run the Ben Holmes dev site. Repository. Let me give it some sort of basic task. Mention that there's a license.md at the bottom of the README. This is something you would probably write yourself, but just to show that there's a Git diff available. You'll go ahead and grab that, do a bit of thinking. So this is what the code diff looks like. This is handing off, and you can see there's an actual place to look at stuff. You can edit in line if anything looks wrong. And that's going to take. So you can hit done. You can also refine it. So if you want to look at a specific code diff and say that's not super accurate, you can do something like, well, this is actually correct, but also add a note about contributing. Say they should report GitHub issues or something.
Is this only running against a singular file? So basically pulling it into a context and firing it off? Or is it taking into consideration the entire context in the chat?
It's taken in the entire context. I think when we refine, we also look at the entire context. And there's also a little tab section here. So if there were multiple file edits, they would all appear in this view. So if there are related files for a code change, those are all in context as well.
How do you think about like the LLM? Because a lot of people say like, I think of it like a junior dev, an intern, or like, what's your mental model when you're talking and working with it?
Yeah, I do. I see it like an IC. I don't really want to label a level because depending on the model, I could say that Gemini is a better IC or individual contributor than I was like the first year starting out, 2 years in industry. So how do you level that? I don't know. I do think that senior level programmers are better at understanding high level problems with architecture and recognizing what the real problem is. Like if you come to a senior with one problem, you'll walk away with 2 other problems that should be solved first. And I don't think agents are super effective at getting to the bottom of what you really want. Even using reasoning, I don't think we're quite there. I still look at Claude as more of an improv partner where it'll just say yes and to anything you tell it, including when you tell it you're wrong. And we need models that can actually think through, look at the architecture, and push back in order for me to consider them senior developers that I would go back and forth with. Right now, I see it as a really effective IC that I can hand a plan to. And if that plan is good enough, it will execute without me having to intervene.
Yeah. I think what I'm missing, I think like where Warp would be really well positioned to actually execute it is like task automation. And similar to what cursor rules does, where you have these glob patterns, which are always inserted into the context for certain file patterns. I think you could apply the same to fire off tasks based on changes to certain files. So for example, if I'm changing like something in the backend server, I want to automatically fire off a task to an LLM, which adjusts the documentation for it. Or when I'm changing the database types, that I'm automatically firing off an adjustment to all the other types or where it is used. And I think like these little automations would open up a lot and could be something like pre-commits. Basically, when you're doing a change here, you're doing other changes down the road, which is something like LLM can be really good at, but aren't really used because you have to like fire off these tasks at a time. And especially in languages like Python and TypeScript, which are like the, I think, dominant languages, they can prevent the mistakes a lot of people make, also me, that you forget to change something in some different module or in a different file.
Yep. So you're imagining if you made a change, it ran git status and saw the change that you made, it would be able to see there are these 5 other files that need to be updated downstream. Like maybe it ran a lint on a refactor that you did. It sees that some functions are no longer available and it just changes them for you. I could imagine that.
Yeah. I think there are 2 things. Like for one, doing automations. Like just I'm pre-configuring a task which should always run based on a glob pattern. Or the second thing is like walking down the dependency tree. So doing something like ST parsing. And
Yeah.
when I'm changing a variable in one, it should also be changed automatically in the files which are importing the variables from another file.
Yeah. That is more in like the IDE flow, editing everything and being a lot more context aware. Like when would you want the automations to run? Before a commit or something like that?
Directly after I make the change. That's why I think
Yeah,
like
that's
based on
some tight
glob patterns.
integration. So it would be a file watcher of sorts if you
Yeah.
wanted to look at it that way. Interesting. Yeah, because I've wanted that a few times where you can cursor tab complete refactors, but as soon as they're sprawling across files, you're back to your old ways of using find and replace for the most part.
Yeah.
Or if you need to add related things, like you said, like a README change or a test change that would affect the code in some way. And that takes some reasoning to figure that out. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's possible. Maybe even with like an MCP server that gives you access to the files when they change. We added that recently. I just don't know enough about MCP to say if that's the right application of that tech. But that is really interesting, yeah.
I think you could even take it more to the extreme and do it based on semantics. Just like configure a prompt, ask an LLM, and it decides on a certain action, even like prompting the user to do something.
Yeah.
I think there are all like these little things you could do, which could help me like as a developer out, because I'm often like forgetting stuff. So I would love to configure like rules which are just prompting me to do certain stuff if I change something else.
Even if it just tells you like, don't forget to do this or something. Yeah. Because the first task I worked on at Warp was actually adding more desktop notifications. So now when an agent's done or it's blocked and waiting for you to answer a question, it'll notify you and jump you to the right tab. So if it was similar to that for actions you're taking, it would pop in at the right time.
Yeah. What
Outside
I
the
always
IDE.
have in nearly every prompt is like it should give me hotkey actions, basically hotkeys of like next steps. And the second thing is I always ask it, okay, how could I phrase it better so I get a better result? So it can give me feedback.
Yeah. Give you feedback on your own stuff. I haven't done that enough. The one thing I love doing is writing. So I don't ask for assistance on that as much as I should, even though literally everyone is using OpenAI to write things for them at this point. I prefer to do the comms myself.
Yeah. Maybe a quick one. What would you say is like missing from the space of code assistance?
Missing from the space. Being able to really see the output of what I'm doing without having to paste things back and forth. I encountered that building a mobile app with Xcode and Swift. And if the UI looked incorrect, the best that I could do is screenshot the UI, put it up against the old AI, and try to circle with markers what is wrong, and then see if it's able to course correct what's going on. If you use a tool that's web-based, it's possible to use Vision for that. If you're building native applications, it's not possible. So I think that's why there have been these really dialed in tools to build React apps and nothing else. Because if you're in a web sandbox, a lot more is possible than just general purpose software development. So I want to see something that's tapping into computer vision to be able to fix things directly without me trying to figure out how to give it context on what is going on. It should be able to see and know with privacy in as part of that equation. Because screen sharing to an LLM over a WebSocket sounds terrifying. But I guess that's what I'm describing.
Yeah. And where can people follow along with you and Warp?
Yes, I'll start with Warp. That's the important one. If you go to warp.dev, you can download it, try it out, join our Discord community, report issues or share feature requests over there. And if you want to follow me, I'm on B Holmes Dev, B Holmes DEV, and that's on every channel. So Twitter, YouTube, that's where I post all of my whiteboard content on this beautiful board right here. And it's also where you'll find me on Discord if you ever join the community.
Yeah, check out the YouTube.